Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. First and foremost, I would like to extend gratitude to all of our audience that has decided to join both Onclusive and Maha for this webinar today. I'm joined by some of the best panelists that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. First and foremost, I'd like to introduce Kathy Krenger, who has held a broad, diverse range of leadership roles inside complex global corporations and agencies with an expertise in stakeholder engagement, reputation management, transformation, and integrated marketing. She's served as the Global Chief Communications Officer at Kraft Heinz, as well as the Head of Global Communications for Hyatt Hotels and the EVP General Manager at Edelman. And now she leads communications for Thread Partners, which is a consultancy focused on bringing solutions to nonprofits while also serving on the CCO advisory board for Maha. From there, we also have Haider Nazer, who is the co-founder and CEO of Maha Global. With over 2 decades of experience in data, enterprise software, and organizational transformation, his leadership spans the growth of numerous companies, serving dozens of Fortune 500 brands, and leveraging advanced technology to help drive strategic decision-making. Driven by the belief that integrating corporate reputation with profit motives can drive positive social and environmental change, Haider continues to pioneer innovative social solutions that empower organizations worldwide. And his commitment to leveraging data-driven insights underscores his mission to enable impactful decision-making and foster sustainable growth. And then last but certainly not least, we have our own Roxanne Papagiannopoulos, who is a senior global solutions consultant here at Onclusive. With over 20 years experience in the PR industry, which spans all sides of the customer experience, including enterprise level customer success, product development, management, and software sales. Prior to joining Onclusive, Roxanne was the managing director over at PR Glue, which was acquired by Onclusive. Here in the US, and founded and sold her own media analysis firm known as RMP Media Analysis, working with Fortune 100 companies and nonprofits. And then here, I am your humble host, Mitch Tulungan, and I am the Enterprise Sales Director here at Onclusive. So again, welcome everybody. We appreciate the time. We're also very excited to announce that Onclusive has entered into a formal partnership with Maha. Haider, do you actually want to kind of talk a little bit about the partnership here at Maha and what we're doing together?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch, and pleasure to be a part of the community here at Onclusive. And on our journey of growing Maha, we saw so many different needs for integration to media monitoring solutions, and we did our own landscape analysis of the space, and several months ago connected with you and the rest of the crew at Onclusive. And we've already been generating value together out in the marketplace. But I think this is just further reinforces our relationship and the joint value proposition of providing a unified framework for how organizations can take a more holistic view of their reputation and understand how it's affecting their stakeholders in real time. So really excited that we are making the partnership more official, and look forward to continuing to gain altitude together as partners.
Absolutely, and I can basically mimic or echo that entire sentiment from what you're saying. With that being said, kind of turning it over to the panel, I do want to kind of keep this conversation very loose and informal. And I kind of want to open it up with our first topic, which is, data can seem very overwhelming. And speaking for our client base here at Onclusive, I know we've got customers who are at the beginning of their data ownership journey, all the way going up to those that have a wide swath of data sources. So perhaps we could start there, which, just kind of open this up to everybody, which are how can communicators successfully manage the influx of data and all these different signals that are coming at them and identify which signals are the most valuable? And I'll open it up. Whoever would like to go first. I'm not going to pick on anybody just yet.
I'll go first. I'll break the ice, as it were. Last introduced, first to speak, so to speak. So you're right. Communicators live and have been living in an environment where the data is constant, and it comes from different sources. It's coming from social media. It's coming from traditional media. It's coming from external reports and surveys, internal reports, including customer feedback, which is something our communicators are now really being tasked with. There's a lot of employee engagement as well as customer feedback. So managing that entire influx it's a challenge. I don't care who you are or what organization you're in. You need a plan, and you have to have a plan in place, because that's the only way you're going to be able to see what signals are buried in that data. They need to be discovered, they need to be reviewed, they need to be addressed. And as communicators, there's a lot of different things that you can do, and I'm not going to take up all of the information that's out there for everyone else to be able to answer. But one of the things that I ask my clients to look at is to actually prioritize based on the goals and the strategies of the organization, because not every piece of data is valuable. So it's important to understand what the priorities are for the organization to match up what you're looking for. So what are the strategic initiatives that you have? Who's your audience? What is your current messaging strategy that you're doing, so that you can filter and find that information effectively. The other piece that I tend to champion and have championed for a long time is that, while you can use and should leverage AI and machine learning, you need to overlay some human analysis for contextual purposes on some of this, because automation is fantastic. It's about taking the large thing and bringing it down to something that's much more manageable, but the nuances that a human analyst can bring, and that could be an internal analyst, that could be an external analyst that you hire with an organization such as ourselves or with Maha, you will find more information and insights because their expertise is applied. It's layered on top of that big filter process that you put in place. So that's my basic approach. So I'll leave it to someone else to add to that.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Roxanne. And, Mitch, you said something really important in the beginning, that there's so many communicators at different lines of the spectrum of data and what it means. When I started at Kraft Heinz, for example, they were really just looking at media impressions for the most part. And we really we weren't even at the time digging into share of voice of our competitors, or just some of the most basic things, which seems shocking possibly, but I think there's going to be a lot of people out there listening to this that are going to be like, oh, I'm not alone, because this other things take priority. But what is powerful is every organization does have different, as Roxanne said, there's so much data out there. And what I think the power where it lives is, communicators are conveners. We bring people together, be it internally or externally. And if you can coalesce all that data, if you can bring it to one place and kind of have that organizing principle under the communications banner of how you all can share your data, and I'm going to say, like, Maha and their platform actually is really good for something like this. But even if it's just bringing all those minds and the people that are looking at data together to think about it in a different way, that's very powerful. And I think it really puts the communications leader in the driver's seat, where oftentimes we're a bit more reactive and instead of proactive, and this gives us an opportunity to kind of change that. So to me, if you can get your IR folks, your ESG team, your brand teams, your insights teams, and look at all the data that's out there, and then bring everybody together under one umbrella in some way, that's just going to be a way that not only can inform the work you need to do, but also just makes the company a little bit more efficient and benefits the whole.
Yeah.
Hey, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just extend, what Kathy's saying. I think what I'm hearing from both of you is really this shift in desire from being data driven to being value creation driven. And I think over the last 10 years, we've gone from a world where primary research, Kathy, I'm sure, at Kraft Heinz and at Hyatt, primary research 10, 15 years ago was kind of the main thing. Yeah. Then, media monitoring became a thing. And what we've seen in the market now is some of our clients might have 4, 5, 6 different media monitoring services they're using, right? And that creates the potential for mixed signals or opposing signals, but more broadly, in a world where the marketplace rewards organizations for what they do more than what they say, a lot of the frameworks that are built currently don't really take into account public disclosures or financial performance. And so really having that holistic view of not only what your stakeholders think and feel about you, but also now beginning to understand how do your actions actually drive perception, and what actions should be prioritized to drive perception is important. I think certainly in the last few months, terms like ESG and terms like sustainability have become very politicized. But if we take those words away and just talk about the intangible assets of a company and a company's goodwill, stakeholders still want to know that companies are showing up for their employees, showing up for their communities, and those have real clear value creation opportunities, whether it's revenue, whether it's brand value, whether it's EBITDA, whether it's share price. I think that's where the next horizon of this conversation is moving towards, around not just becoming data driven, but how do you connect reputation to enterprise value? And I think when we're out talking with a lot of our customers and prospects, that seems to be where the conversation is heading now.
Yeah, I love that you coalesce that into the value that communicators bring to the table, because one of their strongest skills is storytelling. I say that sometimes with air quotes, and I make fun of it to be very, very clear, but that's what it is. It's the ability to communicate, and stories are a great way to do that. The data informs the storytelling, informs the actions, informs the perception. And perception has historically been the hardest thing for a communicator to understand without doing a survey and saying, what do you think of X?
Yeah.
And surveys can be very expensive. So understanding what you're saying and how it's landing, and ultimately, as you very well said, how it's impacting the performance of the organization, that can be very hard to find out in the traditional fashion, because traditionally we are doing media monitoring and it has its place, right? Whether it's traditional or social, you need to hear what's being said. You need to understand if your message is landing, if what's being said on social. We just saw a very interesting election cycle here in the United States, and quite frankly, in several places around the world, and how social moved the needle on a lot of things, whether it was with bots or with people, but it moved the needle. So understanding what's being said, when it's being said, but the key then is ultimately, how has it or will it change the perception of your brand's reputation with your key stakeholders, your audience, the people you're trying to reach? That is a game changer, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I think the other thing you said there, Roxanne, that was important is the stakeholder part of it. And that, again, is where our communications, you're always looking across all stakeholder groups, where a lot of times in other pockets of the organization, you're very focused on one or another, where this opportunity, again, looking more of like from a predictive standpoint and being able to also think through the lens of each individual stakeholder, there can be little nuances that are made that will have more impact and just benefit whatever, message or story or, reputational pillar that you need to. So I think, again, that's a place where communicators are really in a good position and can be in the driver's seat to help inform more broadly.
Yeah, they could be the trusted advisor in the room. We talk about the seat at the table a lot, and I know a lot of people have heard that, but really it's about your C-suite trusting that the information you're bringing to the table is important, it's relevant, and it's not a vanity metric.
Yeah.
It is actually going to provide heft to what the conversations at hand that are going to basically mold the strategies going forward and the responses.
And a tangible example of that is, a client we're currently working with, they spent a lot of time on their MMM models and around understanding, what their advertising mix should be. But what we found with this client was that 75% of their spend, their ad spend, they couldn't assign any sort of ROI to at all. But it was great because 2 years ago they couldn't assign, they almost couldn't assign 100% of the ROI, so they're getting better. But what they wanted to know, and where we're helping them, is how do reputation factors and communication around areas where they're performing better than their competition, areas of environmental impact, social impact, how they're treating their employees, how they're showing up in their communities at large. How are those actions and the messaging on those actions in their advertising, is that having an effect? And in fact, it is. So that's a great example of, Roxanne, what you're talking about is about the communicators having a seat at the table. It's also about reputation being really a strategic driver for all aspects of an organization. I think historically, reputation has been the purview of the reputation team. It's been protected there, but really, whether it's investor relations, whether it's sales, whether it's the advertising team, whether it's the CEO, whether it's the CFO, reputation is impactful to the entire organization. But the entire organization, a lot of times, is executing something related to reputation by gut feel, but doesn't have any quantifiable metrics or underlying drivers to drive the decision making. So I think the reputation team continues to be the purveyor of reputation, but now there's an opportunity to leverage it across the organization more. That's where the real value creation comes from. I think that's the opportunity for reputation teams and their enterprises going forward.
Heider, you mentioned reputation teams. I have only run across, and I've worked with a lot of large organizations. Not many of them have called it a reputation team, because the discipline sits within different, like you said, different parts of the organization impact that. Yeah. And I've only seen that recently, where there's marketing, a subset of marketing is responsible for the reputation of the organization. But I would argue that communicators are at the forefront of that. They are the face and the voice of the organization. So we have seen in communications, and Kathy, I'd love your perspective on this, where the PR function, because it doesn't generate revenue, in many cases gets slid underneath marketing, right? So you have now sometimes competing agendas on how to move forward. I would be curious to see, in your experience, how that may have evolved, and for the better, or maybe not, in when it comes to the reputation itself of an organization. Of course, I left it out.
Yeah. It has definitely evolved, and I think I look at this sometimes as a roller coaster. I think the communications function ebbs and flows a lot, and much depends on the stability of the market, the stability of an organization. There's a lot of things that go into that. So, for example, the best scenario is when the communications role sits in the C-suite, because of that exact thing you're talking about. When you sit under another function, your lens leans oftentimes to that function, right? If they're under HR, let's say, there's going to be much more of a lean towards internal and thinking through that lens. And legal, maybe, depends how your legal team is set up. So it can definitely vary. One of the things when I first started at my last job at Kraft Heinz, we were working through our executive goals for the year for the C-suite. It's an exec team. And in conversation, it came up, we should have a reputation goal, and everybody pointed to me. Kathy, this should be your goal. And I said, I'm all for that, but we're not even measuring it in any sustainable way. So we, have to come up with like how we're going to do that. And then, to me though, this isn't just about communications. We all hold reputation because it's about the corporate brand. It's about the company, who we stand for, what we are. And then Miguel, my CEO, was like, great, I want to have that goal too. I'm like, great. So we need to invest in this. So it's a kind of, it's an education process, because I think a lot of people, they don't know how to measure. They want some magic number, right? Or one thing. But they don't realize, I think, that so many, it's not just media, it's not just social, there's so many things that come into it. So I was going through a 2-year process of trying to kind of educate and help get people on board with me to understand that this could actually be the metric that matters for, or the goals that matter for our organization, and that we all can get behind, just like you all get behind, revenue or your sales figures or whatnot. So
Yep.
We were kind of, and I actually think that's where the board saw a lot of value too. So I just didn't get all the way there yet, but I think it's a huge opportunity. I think it makes a ton of sense, but I think it's a lot harder for somebody in comms role that's not reporting it, that's not in the C-suite level, because it does take a fundamental shift in how you think about how the company looks at success, frankly.
So that's actually a really good. Sorry, Heider, give me 1 second. That's actually a really good, because I want to stick with that thread for a minute. That's actually a really good transition to our next question, which is communications teams are often struggling to showcase value in business terms, right? So as a former CCO and a leader, what tactics have you actually employed to communicate wins to key stakeholders, to the board, to senior leadership, to tie those outcomes back to business goals, not just as it pertains strictly to communications, but to reputation as a whole, since that lives across so many different teams?
Yeah, I will say it hasn't always been the easiest thing to do, because we were creating more like ad hoc reporting versus having something that's systematic that we could go to and kind of show, quarter over quarter to the board. I would get pulled in, frankly, when there was a crisis or a perceived reputation issue. I can think of 2 examples. One was we were performing well as an organization, but our stock wasn't seeing that benefit. And so there was a lot of like, well, the media team needs to do a better job of telling our financial story. So I got together with our head of investor relations, and we pulled together a report that included the analyst reports and the media response, and showed that these things are all happening great, but here's the opportunity of things that we aren't doing as an organization that takes more resources that will help us change that perception a little bit more. But it also comes down to understanding the what, and we didn't have anything explaining to us like why. All the good news is being told, we're plastering it out there, but we're missing something, and we couldn't identify what that was because we didn't have the tools there. And I think that, and I'm not trying to just do a big sell job here, but I'm a person who's gone through this and seen the struggle of, you do all the things that you have in your toolbox and you still can't move that needle. So that just means you don't have all the information. It goes back to the data and understanding the data and being able to use it. So for me, being able to even have that problematic conversation with my board was helpful, because then they were like, wait, so you have some options on how we can dig deeper? Yes. So to me, I think that's a big part of it, is even if you don't know, if you don't have the answer they want to hear, to be smart enough to tell them what you need. Those are the people who are going to loosen the purse strings. They really will, especially in something like that. They're going to be like, we got to figure this out.
And I think, Kathy, as you're sharing that, and you used a term a few minutes ago about educating, the team on reputation. Yeah. I think in a lot of instances, it's about re-education too, because I think a lot of the reputation metrics, and I'm a newbie to reputation and comms. I'm an enterprise software guy, right? But in the last couple of years working with communicators and reputation teams, what I've seen is a lot of them are focused on metrics like share of voice or other awareness metrics. But just because you get coverage about something in the media doesn't necessarily mean it's affecting your reputation. Because I think reputation is more of a longer term objective. And if the goal is to get something in New York Times, I mean, that's great. I mean, I'm not saying getting something in the New York Times is bad, but I'm saying it's not. I think when we talk about value creation and we talk about like creating long-term value for an organization, I think increasingly it's about how do you consistently message on topics that the organization is executing on to build trust with key stakeholders that drive buying decisions, that drive investor decisions, that drive talent acquisition or retention decisions. I think those metrics are different than necessarily just share of voice. I think that's the re-education that you're referring to.
Absolutely. Yeah, and how those stakeholders start mimicking or using, and if they believe and trust in what you're saying, they will start saying that, and that has way more power. We all know that. It has way more power than me saying it, or anybody, or the CEO, or anyone. We can say it all day long. We have a reason to do that. When other people see that over and over and then start saying that on your behalf, then that's when the reputation starts to shift.
Yeah, you definitely want them parroting back to you as if they just thought of it, your ideas, in a manner of speaking, because it's been absorbed. It's become part of the fabric of the culture at that point to be able to share that information. One thing I would add to this is not every, I touched on it earlier, not every organization, and I think you also said this, Kath, not everybody's at the same place in their journey. And media monitoring is essential, but it's already old news even when you get it in real time. It has already transpired. You cannot change it, but it is a benchmark so that you can see what's been happening over time. Marrying that with other pieces of data, but also kind of doing a bit of a trial and error, like having an agile mindset to say, okay, we're going to test this for a month or with these messages and see what happens. We're going to see what the outcomes are here and incorporate postmortems or A/B testing when you're going through that, so that you can actually see what works, as opposed to, as I believe Haider said it, whatever the gut feeling isn't necessarily the way to move forward, because my gut feeling and your gut feeling and Haider's gut feeling, which they can all be different. We all bring different perspectives. So we can still get that diversity of the conversation, but it will be couched in the data that is sitting before us, that is telling us what has occurred, what might have worked in the past, and so on.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We are currently working with a pharmaceutical company that's dealing with recalls, and recalls is becoming a really big issue in the pharma industry right now. And what they're doing is not just looking at their data, but they're looking at other competitors of theirs and looking at what reputation factors have to be in place to be resilient to a recall. And so some companies, because they're showing up in their communities and have built up a reputation insurance, are able to be more resilient. So that's a preemptive crisis management opportunity, is that in a world where recalls are becoming politicized and are becoming kind of an agenda, in Capitol Hill and, here in the US, if you get a recall, what do you need to have in place to be resilient? That's where, again, I keep going back to this word value, but you can really speak to the value of that. Whether the communication or the reputation team communicates that or not, being able to talk to your board about these are areas we need to focus on in terms of action so we can become more resilient, that's a really powerful opportunity for a reputation team.
So I want to pull on that thread just very briefly. I want to talk about how communicators, because the crisis comms is something that's very, very important in this space to everybody, right? Nobody wants to go through a crisis, but at some point everyone will. So how can communicators actually shift from being reactive when a crisis arises to being more proactive and anticipating some of those reputational risks before they escalate? I mean, can you talk a little bit about how folks might be leveraging various tools to identify what reputation pillars are needed to be strengthened in order to withstand something like a recall for that pharmaceutical company you were talking about?
Yeah, so in that particular example, areas of resilience at an industry level were ongoing product innovation, along with how they were creating more access to their drugs and pharmaceuticals in terms of reach. Those are two really differentiating characteristics for companies that were building more resilience when they were dealing with an issue. So again, our client was able to look at, okay, how are they performing in those areas? And in both those areas, they were actually weak. And that's an opportunity for them to be more proactive, to get out ahead, to create some resilience in case a recall happens. But those differentiating characteristics vary by industry, whether it's financial services or consumer packaged goods. Those areas that create more resilience to a brand and more resilience to the reputation are differentiating. I think the key point, though, is I think the old model was, well, let's do some A/B testing to see what's going to work. I don't think that's necessary as much anymore, because the industry level data allows you to look at your market and make decisions more proactively that allow you to build a better risk management plan faster and more confidently.
I think that's great advice. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kathy.
No, I was just going to say that, one thing that's really, I think, really interesting too is there's oftentimes table stakes messaging that you don't spend a lot of time on as a communicator. You're like, well, everybody knows that we are food safety is at the top of our, like, of course, and it isn't something you prioritize and invest in. But when when there are ways to look at the analysis in comparison to competitors or the industry or whatnot, and you see that maybe that message isn't coming through for your own organization, that's a huge opportunity to build that resilience. For example, it's like, first of all, it's already being done, and we're just not telling that story. So we have to, and that to me as a communicator, would give me the proof and the power of like getting ahead of it. And that's what everybody's afraid of, right? If you're can't get ahead of something. If I say, well, this pillar over here, which is going to actually benefit if we're low because we just don't talk about it, but we're actually great at this. Let's talk about it some more, because it'll set us up. If something does happen, it's built that trust. It's built that, people get it, they know it, they believe it, and we've just forgotten about it. So there's some of those things that are kind of table stakes and low hanging fruit that you don't even realize have such an impact, that I think if you're looking across the board at data and how others are doing, your competitors, the industry at large, there might be some real opportunities to shore things up that are not going to hurt. They're easy. You got it, and it's just tell the story. It's like, that's a dream, and I think that is huge. It's huge.
So this reminds me, I had a client back in the early days of the subprime mortgage debacle, and their main communication tactic was just don't say anything, it'll go away, which was frustrating for the communicators that I was working with. But that was what was being said from on high. And we all know what happened there with the implosion, et cetera. And ultimately, the organization itself started to listen. It took a little bit of time, but we were able to demonstrate that if we communicated clearly and early to our key stakeholders about what we're going to do, and I say we because I was embedded in there, I'm always embedded with my clients, but what they were going to do and then actually did it, they could then build some of that reputation resilience, even though it was a very dark time, across the industry of everyone who had put out subprime mortgages. And what we ultimately saw, and in very short order, it was about a month and a half, we did an analysis, and we saw that some of the messaging that we were putting out, my client was putting out, was now getting picked up by our competition. And it was constantly being referenced back to my customer. And so they got a very long tail out of this, because they took that one small piece of advice and we said, just we need to do our job, let our communicators do their job. And in doing so, it worked out way better than what it could have been. And we saw where it was going. So sometimes it's the fundamentals, like you said, Kathy. Who are we? What do we stand for? What are we going to do about X, Y, or Z that has come up? and actually executing on it. It goes a long way to building some of that banked reputation that you will need when the crisis do hit, because the expectation will be that you will communicate clearly and early and do hopefully the right thing, right?
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. One more thing on crisis too. There are different types of crisis, right? There's the stuff that directly impacts your company because of a recall or something, but then there's like a societal crisis or a political crisis that it can be incredibly emotional, and you're going to have people on your teams in your organization who fall on all different lines of the spectrum of what they believe is right and wrong. And, you know, it could be the war in Ukraine or, you know, Israel and Hamas. There's almost a no-win situation in some of those things, but you also know internally, at least, you have to speak out, and anything internal can be external. Having more data to help you as best as possible understand how stakeholders are going to react, how it's going to impact your business, how customers are going to be impacted. I just think those type of really complex things that a lot of times end up being emotional decisions, because people within the organization are like, but no, I feel this, so we have to do this. If you're able to be that person that comes in with data and the insights behind that data to help them see the best way forward, I think, again, that's a really powerful, important way to mitigate a crisis, or frankly, make it less of a crisis, I guess, is the way I would say that. So there are things like that that I think we're not always looking at data. We're almost just like, you look at your competitor. Well, what did they do? Are they going to do something first? Or what do they say? And that's important too. But I think there are other things you can do to arm yourself that'll make you, as a leader in communications, feel you've got more wind at your back and proof to give the best possible recommendation. Right is too strong of a word, because in some of those cases there is no right. But yeah.
Yeah, and
So
win.
hold on. Give me 1 second, everyone. So at this juncture, because we are running a little short on time, we are going to go ahead and we're going to open up the chat while our panelists kind of opine on this last little thought. So please, if you have questions, feel free to submit them now. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the two of you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sometimes the win is simply shortening the news cycle, right? And you can do that with some key tactics. So the wins don't always have to be huge either, like you said, internal or external. But I learned that from one of my clients who was dealing with something rather difficult, and they're like, I just need to shorten this news cycle. If we do that, that's a win, and we'll build on that for the next time. So, Haider?
Well, I think my reflection on this conversation is authenticity. And I think, you know, when you're talking about, like Roxanne, you talked about the company that didn't want to speak out on an issue. There are also companies that have spoken out a lot on social and environmental issues. And it's not about whether to speak out or not. It's about what are you authentically qualified to speak out on. I mean, the DEI issue, there are companies that have spoken out on DEI and gotten hammered. There's a food and beverage company that I won't mention that got really hit with that. But then there are other companies that have spoken out on DEI and done really well. And I think it comes down to how authentic are you on executing on that strategy? How aligned are your stakeholders to that particular reputation factor? That changes by industry as well. So I think what we're really speaking about, it is not this blanket, you know, 5 years ago, when the Business Roundtable talked about purpose, every CEO came out with a net zero commitment, and that we're going to be net zero by 2030 or 2050. Now people are walking back their net zero commitment. The real question isn't whether to speak out or not. It's what are you as an organization committed to? What are you as an organization executing on? Because that gives you the license to speak out on those things. And you know, the example I always use is, you know, Patagonia is a great example of a company that, although they're a very liberal company, because they're authentic, both Democrats and Republicans buy Patagonia because they're authentic with what they talk about, you know? And so that's really what it comes down to. You know, are you authentic as an organization? And it's not just about your commitments, but your track record. Because if you can control the narrative with data around how you're outperforming the market, that's going to build trust. across the aisle.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So with that being said, we do have a couple of questions that have come in. I'm just going to kind of rapid fire these so they're open for anybody. The first one of which, again, open. Compared to how reputation has been historically measured, in the three of your opinions, what's possible today? With how technology is advanced, how measurements changed, how these organizations are going on their various data and communications journeys, what do you guys see as possible today?
Mag, I can start. The unification is really big. I think everyone's looking now. They've gone from buying a bunch of stuff to now, okay, how do I get a single source of truth, a single system of record, and how do I start making better business decisions from all these investments? So that's, I think, the unification. And the ability to create a predictive model off that unification is what we're hearing as a desire heading into 2025 from a lot of the market.
And I would add to that speed. I think, again, I look back to when I was first measuring reputation, it was like an annual study that you did every year, which was immediately outdated and not very helpful. And in some cases, it's still the benchmark. So to me, like having the opportunity to look at things on a quarterly, daily, weekly, whatever instant, you don't want to like, oh, you're not gonna, I don't know that you should do constant and refresh, but the idea that you can be much faster and more nimble and agile is huge. And that's because that's how the industry is working now. So you have to be there. And I think that's goes hand in hand.
I think the other thing that has changed is the audience themselves. It used to be you'd have to come in and drop this big book that had all your clippings in it, and that was success. I mean, I'm talking ancient times in a manner of speaking, but I still run across this where people are like, I need to, and they're all quantitative metrics, and like, I need to know how many of this and how many. I'm like, my response is, that's great. We can give that to you, through our platform. Absolutely. But what are you going to do with that? What does success look like? So we start on another journey because a lot of the doers in the organization now are digital natives. They understand, and data is not a concern, it's a tool. And because they're digitally native, tools that can give them those efficiencies, as long as they have a nice UX, they're able to leverage it right away and start to make a difference. So part of it, I think, has been just the speed of technology as a whole and how that has impacted the workforce that is coming into play right at this stage.
Okay. I actually really like this next question because it speaks to a lot of what we're seeing change in the industry everywhere today with the creation and the implementation of AI. So how can you effectively leverage AI to quantify financial risk and build more trust with key stakeholders?
That's a good one.
I can start.
Absolutely, go for it.
One stakeholder that a lot of times gets left out in a reputation analysis are equity analysts, specifically sell-side equity analysts. So there's a lot of data out there now, equity analyst research notes on what reputation factors are getting covered by equity analysts. So that's a great opportunity in terms of like value creation. If you're a company where your communications team is working with your IR team to figure out how can we get more coverage or how can we get better coverage, or we're not going to have the greatest earnings call this quarter. What else can we talk about? Well, being able to pinpoint and speak to analysts that have a propensity to cover companies that are executing on their environmental commitments or on their philanthropy or on product innovation. Understanding those reputation pillars and what analysts are oriented more towards which ones help you hone your message and hone your audience, both who's covering you and potentially who could cover you. That's an example of using AI and new data sources and a multi-stakeholder view to really lean in and and on that note, it is interesting that even though environmental impact has become politicized quite a bit, you'll see that a lot of sell-side equity analyst research is still rewarding companies that are executing on their environmental impact, especially around supply chain resiliency. So again, it's a great opportunity to if you've invested in those things and you're a company that's thinking about, well, gosh, I don't want to be accused of being woke. That's a great example of how you can leverage an asset you have to a particular stakeholder that that you can get a business value out of.
Yeah,
Great.
especially if they can see that financial impact that could have too, right? So it's got the environmental impact, but it's going to benefit the company or the financial impact eventually as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then Kathy, this is the last question that's come in, and I want to direct this one specifically to you. If you have one piece of advice for this audience of corporate reputation leaders that we have, what would it be?
It would be to lean in on data. I mean, and to take the opportunity to bring the stakeholders together within your organization. I think data, I think I said this earlier, I think it's power, right? And oftentimes still communications can be seen a little bit as a nice to have versus a must have. And I think if you are the person who can bring all the data sources together into one place and show that value and show many different slices of business value out of that, it's going to elevate the entire communications function. And people from your board to your C-suite are going to see you as kind of that convener and strategist. And to me, it's just, when I grew up in communications, it wasn't about data. So this is a whole new thing that but I think it's worth it. And it's where you need to be, and you get people on your staff that understand it and help rise it up to you. That's the most important thing.
I'm going to add to that. I know this is a Kathy question, but I'm going to add to it if that's
Please,
okay.
by all means.
Kathy. We talked about the fact that there are different organizations at different points in this journey. If you're at the very beginning, or if you haven't even started, start.
Yeah.
There's nothing, you lose nothing by trying to put together, and I'm not just try, put a brand reputation program together. You have partners like Onclusive, like Maha, who can help you with that and guide you along. And you don't have to take massive steps. You can take the first small step, see how that works for whatever period of time, then build on that. And soon, before you know it, you have a baseline that you can benchmark against, and you can start, to Kathy's point, being that trusted advisor and saying, okay, here's what we have learned, here's what we're going to do going forward, here's how it informs the strategies that we've just put forth for the next fiscal quarter or whatever the case may be. So getting started on the other end of the spectrum is something that I would definitely say, do that. Just take the leap. It is not scary.
Absolutely. Understanding that data really is truly essential for everybody out there. Communicators, reputation owners, everyone, right? And embracing and getting comfortable with the sheer quantity of large data sets that are going to be out there is going to be incredibly important, because it's going to help you inform your strategy ultimately. And then being able to extract those actionable insights and communicate and report back on that business value is really what's going to help keep PR communicators, reputation stakeholders having a seat at that table. And really the best way to do that, regardless of where you're at in your journey, is embracing that big data, leveraging your media monitoring partners like Onclusive, leveraging reputation measurement partners like Maha to really sit here and wrap your arms around all of that. So with that being said, folks, we are at time. I definitely appreciate everyone stopping by. And if there are any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to either myself here, Mitch.Tulungen@onclusive.com, or our friends over at Maha, Haider Nazair and Kathy Krenger. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.